Hello, seventh grade. Hope all still going well, and you're having a good time at home, helping out, getting outside, getting some fresh air, and being nice to brothers and sisters as well, and of course, mom and dad. We're gonna go ahead and get started again this week. We are gonna do an older review lesson, one of them, and then we're also going to do a new lesson that we have not done before. I just think it's also good to keep touching up on stuff that we're at least retaining information. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. This is lesson 77. We have already done this. There are 5 examples in there. I'm gonna only do 3 of them since we've done this before. I'm gonna do example 1, example 3, and example 5. And if we have any more questions, we can always, we'll do our question and answers on Wednesday and Thursday. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Example 1, it says, what percent of 40 is 25? Okay, and again, this is lesson 77. Okay, percent of a number is what that's called. So what percent of 40 is 25? So when we write this out, we know that of means multiply and is means equals. Okay, so when it says what percent of 40, I'm going to write WP. And to me, that just stands so I remember what percent. Of is times 40. This word meant this, they said of right here. And this they said is. That's an is. And then I think it said 25. Yep. Okay, so now, basically what you want to do here is you want to find out what is this number right here. What is this percent that we don't know? And how we do that is you do the opposite of what this sign says. So this says times, we are going to divide. Okay, and you're going to take the very first number that's on the right side of the equals. Like if I was going to split this right down the equals, you have the left side, and on the left side you have the number we don't know, the percent we don't know, a time sign, and a 40. And only on the right side, you have a 25. Okay, so when you do this, you always start with the right side number, or the number that doesn't have anything else with it. In this case, it's 25. So I'm going to start with 25, and I'm going to divide that by 40. Okay, and I'm looking for a percent. Okay, so let's go ahead and we can do that. So I'm going to go 25 divided by 40. And actually, what would even be smarter than this is just a fraction. We could reduce this fraction and then divide it so we don't have to divide bigger numbers. Let's do it like that. That would make more sense. Okay, so let's reduce this. There's a number that goes into both of those, a common multiple that goes into both of those that we can reduce that. And we're going to divide it by 5, okay? Both numbers by 5. So 25 divided by 5 is going to equal 5. And our bottom number is going to, 40 divided by 5 is going to equal 8. So it's 5 divided by 8, okay? That'll make it a little bit easier to do. So 5 goes on the inside. 8 goes on the outside, and again, we're looking for a percent, okay? But we do know our first thing, we're going to get a decimal here, and then we'll have to change it to a percent, okay? So, again, when the big number is on the outside, you automatically go decimal, a decimal right above it, and then a 0. I would say decimal, decimal, 0. Okay, so now we're looking, how many times does 8 go into 50? That's 6. 6 times 8 is 48. Minus it, you get 2 left. Now we need to get this exact percent here, okay? So once we run out of numbers and we still have 2 left over, we need to add another 0 and drop it down. How many times does 8 go into 20? And that's twice. With 4 left over when you subtract it. Again, let's add another 0. And again, now we're going to end up with no remainders this time because 8 goes into 40 evenly, and that is a 5. Okay, so 0.625 is the decimal answer. But it doesn't want a decimal. It wants a what percent. That's why I always write the W and the P so I can remember if it's asking for what percent or does it say what number. That's not a percent, that's just a number. Anyways, how do we go from decimal to percent? You move it twice to the right. It's that simple and it never changes, okay? If you want to go from decimal answer to percent, you move the decimal 2 spots to the right, which turns into 62.5%. Okay? We'll go ahead and go on to the next one. Okay, we're going to go to example 3. This one says 75% of, so let's start it out like that. Let's make sure we write that. I'm going to write 75% of, number of means times, okay? 75% of what number? I'll write WN. WN is going to equal, that's is, equals 600, okay? So we're looking for a number that's going to be 75% of a total. We're looking for 75% of a total, a number that we don't know, and it's going to equal 600, okay? Now, when we're using percents in the equation, in the actual problem, we can't actually use the number 75. We have to use the decimal. And as you just seen in our last example, when you go from decimal to percent, you move it twice to the right. If you want to go from actual percent back to decimal, you're going to move it twice to the left. So the decimal is actually right here. It's after the 5, and we need to move it 2 spots back, so it's actually going to say 0.75 times what number equals 600. Okay? And then now we can solve it again. So, how do you solve it? You start by doing the opposite of what this sign says. You start with the number that's all by itself. In this case, it's on the right side of the equals, and it's the number 600. So, you're going to start with the number 600, and you are going to divide it by 0.75. Okay? That's just one way to write it. Let's go ahead and let's write it like this. 600 is the first number. That always goes in the box. 0.75 is on the outside. Now, we cannot do this yet because when we do division by hand, like we're doing right now, like this, you cannot have a decimal on the outside right here. So this has to be moved next to the bar that comes down of the box. It's got to be to the right of the 5. So we actually have to move this twice, 2 spots. But if you move the outside number 2 times, you have to move the inside number 2 times. So the decimal is right here, even though we don't put it in. You have to move this one twice to the right as well, which is just going to add 2 more zeros. So it's going to be a 6 with 4 zeros. So I'm just going to write that over here. So now the outside number will say 75. The inside number will say 60,000. Okay? So now, we need to go about and figure out how many times does 75 go into 600. Okay? Well, we know 75 times 10 would be 750. And I would say if we took away 1, 75, that's 75 times 9, that's still going to be over 600. So I think it's 8. Let's go ahead and check that. I'm going to do 75 times 8 to see how many times 75 goes into 600, just the first 3 numbers. 8 times 5 is 40. 8 times 7 is 56, plus 4 is 60, which it goes in exactly, and it's 600, so it goes in 8 times. I'm going to write that over the second 0. And 75 times 8 is 600. And when you subtract it, you have 0 left over. What happens when you have these 2 at the end? You just move them to the top. So, what number? It's the number 800. And if I took 800 times 0.75, I would get 600 for my answer. Okay, so I'll get out of the way so you can kind of see how that started again. We wrote it down up top. We wrote the percent. But remember, we can't leave the percent as a normal number right now. And we had to move it twice to the left. So it's at 0.75. Then we went over here and we started dividing 600 by the other number, by 0.75. And we said we cannot do it because when you're dividing by hand, you need to have the decimal next to the bar. So it's got to be to the right of the 5. So we had to move it twice to do that. And if you do it to the outside number, you have to do it to the inside number. Okay? And then we just divided it out. 60,000 divided by 75, and we got 800. Okay? Okay, and we're going to go jump to example 5. Okay, and it says 60 is 150% of what number? So we'll just write that out. 60 equals, remember that's is, 150% of is times, and then we're looking for a number. What number? That's what we're looking for. Okay, so again, how do we solve this? Well, we have to make our percent a decimal. And we know to go from percent to decimal, we actually need to move it twice to the left. Okay, 2 times to the left, so the decimal is right there. We're going to move it 2 spots, which is actually going to say 60 equals 1.5 times a number we don't know yet. Okay, so now we go about what we got to do. How do we solve this? You do the opposite of what it says. You start with the number that's by itself. In our previous 2 examples, the number that was by itself was always to the right of the equals. This time they just flipped the problem around on us. Now it's on the number that's by itself, 60. There's nothing else with this. That's on the left side. You still solve it the same. You start with the number by itself, 60. You do the opposite of what the sign says. The sign says times, so we're going to divide. And then you divide it by the number that you know on the opposite side, which happens to be 1.5. Okay? So let's go ahead and do that. 60 divided by 1.5. But again, the same thing happens. We cannot have a decimal that's not next to the bar of the box of the division problem. Okay, so this has to be moved 1 time to the right, as is does the number inside the box has to get moved 1 time to the right. So it's actually going to say 600 divided by 15. Okay. How many times does 15 go into 60? That's 4 times, and it goes in evenly. Okay, there's 0 remainder. And what happens when there's a number or 0 at the end? You just bring it right up, and 40 becomes your answer. Okay, so if I were to take 40 and plug it in, and I take it times 1.5, I would get the answer of 60. Okay, so hope this helps clarify some things. Hopefully you doing this a second time will just make things clearer, and you'll have a lot more comfort and ability in these math lessons. So thanks for listening, and hope to have a good day.